Welcome to the BeWell program. I'm Dr. Ted Bender, a clinical psychologist and Chief Executive Officer of the BeWell Network. My goal in this program is to educate people about mental health awareness and to reduce the stigma around mental health and substance use disorders. Today I am honored and pleased to interview former NFL player, commentator, and current host of American Ninja Warrior and The Talk, Akbar Gbaja-biamila. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Dr. Bender. Appreciate you.
You're an advocate for improving people's lives through fitness and overall healthy lifestyle, and which I'm a firm believer that self-care and healthy lifestyle and regular exercise are incredibly important while trying to improve your mental health stability. So let's dive into that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your advocacy for good physical health and how that relates to good mental health stability.
Well, it's very interesting as I continue to learn and evolve, especially around the conversation with mental health, as far as physical activity. For me, it really was my personal journey was as a young kid when my parents used to fight, I used to just try to get out the house and go play basketball. And it would allow me to get lost in whether it's me trying to get better and working on a jump shot or me playing a pickup game. But there was something that feeling that I got where everything was just an escape, but then B, whether it's the endorphins and all the stuff that's just running through the body just made me actually feel better. It also gave me time away from whatever the stress was. But as I've grown older, I realized that there needed to be, more attention to whatever the problem is, because whereas for me and for everyone's different, but for me, sports got me away, physical movement got me away. It was a stress reliever, but I still had to deal with the problem, whatever the problem was. And so as an adult now, when I have time, I use that time to think about the issues that I'm going through and then try to go get help for that, whatever that issue is, whether it's a marital issue, whether it's, existential, whatever the threat is or whatever that issue is. I try to make sure I go and at least attend to it. And even if I don't attend to it, at least I write it down and I know what it is rather than not knowing what it is and just existing in life.
Those are interesting points that you just brought up. So in a way, physical training and physical exercise allows you to deal with some of those issues or figure out what those issues are. Then the next step is going to deal with those, facing them head on. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. Right. And sometimes I have the tools and a lot of times I don't have the tools to deal with them. And so when I'm trying to process it, it's for me, it's always good. And that help for me has always been like a counselor.
Yeah.
And I didn't really see a counselor until I think the very first counselor I ever saw was in 2007 during my NFL career. And it was really because Tiger Woods was talking about seeing like this sports psychologist. And I thought, wow, like if Tiger Woods doing it, maybe I should do it. And I needed to try to figure out, because at this point I had been cut several times. I felt like the Miami Dolphins was my last stretch. This was going to be my last opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get the mental element. But Tiger Woods kind of made it cool back then, because I was like, well, he's doing it. He's seeing the sports, whatever. That's why his game is so tight. Well, I want to do it. And then from there, when I got married a couple of years later, then started going to marital counseling. And then I just started becoming more aware.
Well, there's a few things I wanted to touch on there. Just the fact, you're talking about reaching out when you needed help. You mentioned Tiger Woods made it okay. Reducing the stigma around, especially men seeking treatment for mental health, is so important. Tiger Woods kind of got that started, like you mentioned. And to our listeners and to our viewers, I just want to point out that oftentimes, especially men, we grow up in this macho role where we always have to be tough and never cry. It can be very hard for men to seek out treatment when they need help because we feel oftentimes like it means we're weak, right? Or it's a weakness to reach out for help. But I'm sure you would probably agree, reaching out for help when you're struggling is actually a sign of significant strength.
Yeah, it is. And, I actually would like to give men a little more credit. And when I say that is because I do think a lot of men do reach out and men do try to express themselves. But oftentimes it's the feedback that we get that becomes the most detrimental.
Yeah.
So, yes, there is the idea of feeling weak if you have a problem. And there are guys who are stuffers. but there are also expressive men like myself that I've been around other expressive men. And whether you're dealing with it in a coach, in an athletic environment where somebody's calling you weak-minded, right,
Yeah.
in that space, or if you're in a relationship, right, and your spouse, may not be receptive or don't know how to deal with a man who's very expressive, and that man feels like he's shut down because he's trying to communicate how he feels. And oftentimes, especially like in relationships, men end up trying to be responsible for their spouse's issue, right? Like, hey, I feel this way. And then she's offended that you feel that way. And then you turn around and try to manage her feelings and try to apologize. And so, there's different ways to why men feel that they don't have a space to be able to reach out for help, because oftentimes it's associated with a negative feedback. So again, negative feedback because the coach thinks you're weak. Negative feedback because your wife is upset or your girlfriend's upset that you have certain feelings. In other words, saying you shouldn't feel that way. And then you end up going into this stuffing mode. I don't know if that was a lot there, but I think there is something there when it talks about it's okay to get help. B, as men, it's okay to express yourself. And then the other is educating people on how to receive expressive men. Because sometimes all the blame gets put on our shoulder as a man, for me, thinking like the blame gets put on my shoulder that I'm not reaching out for help. But when I try to reach out for help, I'm kind of being shunned. And that's both from men and from women.
That's where the counseling, the marital counseling you mentioned, can be really helpful, because I used to do a lot of couples counseling earlier in my career, and a lot of times it really came down to communication between the two people, how to communicate more effectively, how to accept each other's feelings and not get angry by it, and work on improving that communication pipeline really can make a big difference.
Yeah, yeah.
I noticed also you're an advocate for the Michael J. Fox Foundation, where you talk a lot about the experiences you had with your own father with Parkinson's. Interestingly, before the show got started, me and my team were talking a little bit about being a caregiver and what it's like to live with people who have diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and what you do with the Michael J. Fox Foundation?
Yeah, so back in 1998, 99, my father was misdiagnosed with having a stroke, and then we later found out about a year or so later that my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He was correctly diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he's been living with that ever since. But it was very difficult for me in the beginning because, for me personally, I saw my father as Superman, and so I thought perhaps my dad was faking it. He just didn't want to work anymore. He was just tired, and this was his only way out. This was my personal conversation I was having in my head because I just couldn't figure it out. Like, there's nothing that could ever happen to my dad. And as I became more and more educated on Parkinson's, it was very personal to me. But it wasn't until one of the competitors on American Ninja Warrior competed with Parkinson's, Jimmy Choi, and it changed my life. And I saw with his physical testimony of going out there and competing, making no excuses, but also using it to highlight the education around Parkinson's. And I'm going, he's doing that with his platform. And it challenged me to want to do better with my platform. I just kept it to myself. I just figured, I only knew Michael J. Fox and Muhammad Ali with Parkinson's. I just didn't know that there was a bigger community. And I just said, hey, I want to do more. How can I use my platform to be able to amplify awareness, being able to raise money, to be able to, hopefully bring a cure, find a cure for this disease. But it's emotionally tough on anyone who's a caregiver. Yeah. I've only been a caregiver for my father for a short amount of time, but my brother, who is the primary caregiver for my father, just hearing the stories, hearing how challenging it is, and even for the things when I've had my father to take care of him, how tough it is, as a family man or just even as an individual. And it wears on you mentally because there is that, what I call the Superman syndrome. It's still my father. I still see him and I know this might sound crazy and I hope it's not insensitive to anyone, but it is still hard for me, even knowing that my dad is going through and he's been diagnosed with it. I have a lot of empathy for him, but still, I somehow think any day now he's just going to snap out of
Yeah.
this and he'll be back to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's just like this weird thing, an association in your head. But I remember some of the tough days of, having to be a husband, a father, and taking care of, my father. And there's guilt. There's this enormous amount of guilt. Like, how dare you feel tired, or how dare you feel overwhelmed because of everything my father sacrificed for me to have the life that I have today, and so you don't know how to reckon that, like, how do you deal with that? Like, I still don't know how to deal with that. I just kind of, put my head to the ground going, hey, whatever my dad needs, I'm going to make sure I give it to him. A, because I want to, and B, because I feel like that's what my dad deserves. But not knowing how to manage those emotions, it wears on me, at least.
Well, that brings it to another good question. There's lots of people listening who are in similar situations. So you've been doing this now for a few years, you mentioned. What have been some of your tactics to deal with the overwhelming emotions that go along with it, the frustrations, the times where you might feel like you're getting really angry with them, and that guilt that you mentioned? How have you dealt with that as positively as you can?
Yeah, well, definitely. Anger has never been a part of my frustration, but the guilt has always been
Yeah.
one. And I think really it's with time. I don't have any secret, potion outside of, with time, I've learned to be more prepared. Okay, every time I'm with my dad, I'm like, okay, he had this issue last time. How do I problem solve around it? His last visit to Los Angeles, I mean, just making sure I had a walker. I had
Yeah.
one of those lift chairs. I had one of those beds that can put him in different positions. I made sure I had cleaning stuff for him when he's, when he has to go to the restroom, a chair for him to be in the shower, all those things that I just literally sat and just thought about all the things that inconvenienced him or things that made it tough for him. And I did that and tried to, and when new things popped up, I just marked it down. Oh man, we didn't have this.
So for you, if I'm hearing you right, you have managed it very well by not only being prepared from a mindset point of view, but also from an environment of care point of view. Putting those two things
Yes.
together has helped you to get through it and prepare a good experience for your father.
Yeah, yeah, to the best possible, the best way possible, and things will pop up. Like, oh, I didn't think about that. Next time, I will have, I'll have this, and never wanting my father to feel like he's a burden, and he's not. My
Yeah.
father's not a burden, but never wanting that, because I think that's also hard too. Like, my dad is a whole human being, and I can only imagine, what that might feel like to raise a child and then have a child have to take care of you and feeling like perhaps he's inconveniencing me, and so I always want to make sure that my dad knows that he's not inconveniencing me. Are there challenges?
Yeah.
Yes, but that's a part of it. Just because it's a challenge doesn't mean it's an inconvenience, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you saying that. I think that's an important
Yeah.
kind of perspective to take. It's also a major issue in this country. It's one of the reasons that we see, especially older adult males, attempting and dying by suicide so often in the United States because of something that you mentioned specifically. One of the biggest risk factors for that is perceived burdensomeness, where a family member feels like they are a burden on their family. Sometimes it's completely in their head too, a complete distortion. They may not be a burden at all, but they believe that they are a burden, which leads to the kind of the desire for suicide. In and of itself, it's not enough usually for a completion or an attempt. But when you put together desire, perceived burdensomeness, if you don't have a lot of family or you don't have a lot of belongingness, those two things together can become a real recipe for negative consequences, and that happens all the time in the United States. In fact, men ages 65 and older are very high risk for suicide, and you kind of touched on some of the reasons why, and it sounds like you're doing a fantastic job making him not feel like he's a burden. So I applaud you for that. I think our listeners also really
And
learn
also, yeah,
something.
and also kudos too, because I want to make sure it's clear that I have so much love for there's seven of us, and my brother just right before me has been my dad's primary caregiver, and even he had to say, hey, look, I need help. I need I need a month just to where I can recalibrate. And, you know, I just literally sat and just thought about all the things that, made it tough for him. And, so I always want to make sure that my dad knows that he's not inconveniencing me. Are there challenges? Yes, but that's a part of it. Just because it's a challenge doesn't mean it's an inconvenience, if that makes sense. So it's being able to create a system too and being available. But
Yeah.
he does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the NFL. You also mentioned my favorite team, by the way, the Miami Dolphins. I'm a longtime Dolphins fan. I love the Dolphins.
Okay.
And it brings up thoughts about. And actually, I had John Sally on the show a
Oh, yes.
little while back, and he was talking all about the '90s and the Bad Boys, the Detroit Pistons, and I asked him,
Oh, yeah.
what were some of the mental health conditions he saw in the NBA at that time, and how did people deal with it? And his answers were pretty surprising because from an outside perspective, like when I look at professional athletes like yourself, people who've made it to the top, the pinnacle, not just in America, but world's best athletes, you don't get there by mistake. You don't get there by accident. It's not just you're born with it. You get there through tremendous amount of hard work, discipline, incredible motivation, and
Sacrifice.
desire. Sacrifice, yeah, that's the word I was looking for. So, in my mind, and to the lay person, in order to achieve that level of excellence, you'd think like you got to be very well put together, and you're doing the right things, and you're never screwing up. It's not always the case, though. And he was explaining to me how he had teammates that had severe bipolar disorder, and he never knew who was coming into the locker room that day. So, and then when you mentioned the Dolphins again, I was thinking about Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa and the concussions he's had. I worry for him. I was wondering what your perspective is on that. Did you see a lot of mental illness in the NFL personally, or maybe because of some of the head injuries, or what is your perspective on that? I was just curious more than anything.
Yeah, I don't know that I could diagnose that, Doc.
Yeah.
And I say that because, I played in a different era of football.
Yeah.
So my rookie year was 2003. I got done playing in 2008. And, the way they treated that situation then, like, it was a lot of the same mantra of mental toughness.
Yeah.
If you did have a concussion, it's like, hey, you just had a little cobweb, shake it off. So we didn't have the education or the ability to be able to see that. Now, did I see mood swings? Did I just see people where you thought, ooh, this person might be, but you just kind of wrote it off as such. But, not really knowing and being able to go back and look and see. But I will say that, one of the mental health issues that I think happens to every player that I can really personally speak to is life after professional sports. And I think it's the way people see us as athletes and the way we see ourselves. You've grown up your whole life you're right, to make it to professional sport. There's a tremendous amount of sacrifice, that you had to give up to be that good. There are a lot of birthdays and playing in Christmas holiday tournaments and all these different types of things where you have to give up because you have this dream, and very few make it to the pro. And so you've seen and you realize that you've invested so much of your time into this one thing, you actually start to believe the hype or believe the ink or believe this idea that that's all you are as an athlete. And then once you transition out of that and people only see you as an athlete, that makes it very, very challenging. You're thinking my self-worth and my self-value is that of an athlete. I remember, and just kind of my personal story was, I remember when I was transitioning out of football, I was embarrassed that I wasn't playing. Somehow I thought in my head I was supposed to be playing forever or for at least 10 years. And I didn't have that number. And whenever people would see me at 6'6", 260, people seemed like, how come you're not playing? It was almost like they were befuddled. Like what else? You have no other worth or talent outside of sports. Like, you should be playing. That's how I perceived it. And then, I would hide and I wouldn't want to go out in public. If I did, I just want to be in and out real quick. I just didn't want people asking me every time, what team am I playing for? How come you're not playing? And it was exhausting, because that's how people see you. The other part of that is your social circle. You hear this mantra in the locker room, you my brother, I'll die for you. You're showering together, eating together, flying together, rooming together. You're doing everything together. And then boom, once you're cut, it's like those guys who are your brothers are now too busy for you, or they don't want to associate because you're on the outside. they're on the inside. And it's just like, oh my goodness, where do you go? You've developed this whole world, right, for however many years you've invested, and now you're removed from that, and it's going. And you mentioned this earlier, like this kind of this not having this belonging.
Yeah.
That is difficult. I don't care if you made $100 million in your contract or if you made 500,000 in your contract. I mean, it is. I don't care who you are. I don't care how big your name is. I don't care if you're the most famous Michael Jordan. Every single athlete has gone through it.
Yeah.
You know, where they're going, wow, who am I now? And you have to redefine that in the process of everyone still looking at you as this athletic whatever. And that's a very hard one. So the way we treat each other and the way fans and the way the public treat us is one of the hardest mental adjustments to make, you know?
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's like a twofold factor. It's one, how other people view you, but two, I imagine you probably started playing sports at a very young age. You know, you did that for 20, 25 years straight, practices, training, game time, and then all of a sudden, like you said, it stopped. And how do you redefine yourself? Also, how do you redefine who you are as a person? You were obviously very successful with that, but I imagine there was a lot of rockiness in between your broadcasting career and the end of your NFL career.
Yeah, there was. I liken it to being fired and your access key doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And you can't get like something that you did for 20 years. You just swiped your little access key to get into the building. And now all of a sudden, not only are you not allowed anywhere near the access point to get in, like, but that card doesn't work. Like, you're like, whoa, like all your friends are still working inside and your schedule has changed. Their schedule has changed. They may not be reaching out with you because they don't have proximity. Mm-hmm. And so that proximity, you start realizing like, wait a second, my relationship was based on proximity, not because of who I am as a person. And it really messes with you. You're like, yo, was my teammate really my brother? Uh-huh. Would he have really died for me? Did he really love me? You know what I mean? Like, and that's really challenging, you know? And so those relationships, and then the other side of that too, for guys who play a longer period. I remember playing with Rich Gannon, and I remember he and I having a conversation years after, you know, our playing days. And, you know, I can't believe I'm going to actually say this. But, you know, his name is Richard. But we used to call him Dick Gannon, but not because it was his nickname, because he was kind of a jerk to us. And we talked to him, and he said, I talked to him, and he's like, man, when you're a journeyman like I was, and I had to wake my way, and then you reach to a certain level, and you start making connection with the guys, and then boom, they get cut. You make connection with a guy, and boom, they get cut. You start to develop this callus where you don't want to get close to certain people anymore because you don't think or know how long they're going to be there. And I was like, oh my goodness, I take back the name calling, because what I saw coming in as a rookie was a guy who seemed very cold. But I never thought of it as a way where he was able to express to me that, you know, it was hard to get close to people because you've been in the league at that point 15, 16 years. You know how many relationships or guys I really like this guy. Boom, tomorrow he's gone.
Yeah.
You never see him again. He's gone back to wherever he came from. You know what I mean? That's tough.
So that coldness and callousness that you saw from some players was more of just kind of a way to defend their own psyche because they weren't sure who was going to be there the next day or the next year or the next season.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
When you were talking about kind of going through sort of an identity change or identity crisis, how do you reach out? Who do you talk to? What was most helpful for you to kind of get through that period to a place where you were ready and mentally ready to take on new challenges?
Yeah, it's the good old phone. You know, I think it's the phone that allowed me to be able to reach out to people and have those conversations. And I thank God that I was surrounded with people who were, you know, I talked earlier at the beginning of this, talking about getting around expressive people who could express their feelings. But, you know, I found a group of men who were, you know, recently retired, and we were going through the same thing. So it started off as making fun of this process and us bonding and being able to talk about it and creating real relationship, and then problem solving. And, you know, ultimately it's finding a good group. I don't think that God designed us to do life alone.
Agreed.
By ourselves. And I think that's the one benefit that playing team sports allowed me, is really like realizing how to, depend on, your teammates. You can't do everything, by yourself. And that's why you have a left end and a right end and a linebacker and a quarterback. And you have people who are playing different positions in your life. So I created what I call my own team. Some guys had to play multiple roles, where, I had the guy that I could just vent to and he would just be a good listener. And then I had the friend who was the connector and, oh, you should call such and such, and you got to call, and start being able to do those things that allowed me to kind of help forge a way and re-identify myself.
That makes a lot of sense. And for our listeners out there, I think what we can take away from that is, if you're struggling with something similar or anything else, mental health disorders, substance use disorders, whatever the case may be, having a good support group or people that you can lean on in tough times that may have similar experiences can be a really good way to help get you through those really difficult times. And I encourage all of you to seek that type of support. If you're dealing with mental health issues or substance use disorders, substance use issues especially, there are all kinds of support groups out there for you to reach out to that can be very helpful and supportive along the way.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is, like, it's so crazy because it's interesting because so many people are willing to help.
Yeah.
And I realize that, but when you're in it, it feels like no one cares. Yeah. No one's going to try to help me. And I do this to my kids too. I do this exercise with my kids. I'm like, you do know, no matter what you see on social media or on the news, that we are more wired to be in community. I go, watch this. And I roll down my window to a random person in the car. And I say, excuse me, I'm trying to get to Target. Can you tell me how to get there? They go, oh, yeah. Here's what you want to do. And some know how to, and my kids know where the local Target in the store is or whatever. And some people who don't know, but they're still trying to help you. The others, like, here's what you want to do. The cars are honking in the back, but they want to make sure that I get it. I said, did you see that right there? I don't know this person from anything, but this person was willing to help. And I've done it in different ways. If it's not direction, I'm saying, hey, I've got some boxes in my car. Would you mind helping me? Oh, yeah, sure. Where you park? I'll help you. I'm like, we're designed that way. And so reaching up and picking up the phone and calling a friend and calling somebody who might want to help, and even sometimes strangers are willing to help you if you'll just ask.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a great way to teach your kids about that subject as well. I'm gonna steal some of those dad tricks from you. Being a co-host on The Talk and a broadcaster, what do you think the media can do, especially to help kind of reduce and end the stigma around mental health? That's one of my main missions in my career, is to help reduce stigma. You being on this show today, freely talking about this kind of stuff, helps that. And if there was anything that good that came out of the pandemic, I think the issue of mental health awareness has really catapulted forward. Long ways to go. But what do you think personally, being a strong voice in the media, what do you think the media can do to help with that same struggle to reduce stigma?
Boy, you hit something there. I think it's really normalizing real behavior instead of stereotyping certain behaviors. I say, for example, I think about, and again, for me personally as a father, I'm sensitive to this. I'm really, really upset with the way the media portray fathers and men in general. And the amount of scrutiny that we get as men and as fathers, it is mentally taxing and is its own mental health crisis, believe it or not. And so if we change the narrative, instead of saying, hey, we're going to stereotype fathers like this, really try to give a broader and a real picture of what fathers look like. And there's so many fathers out there who are involved, but it sounds like you almost have to reinforce it or double down on it because there's a way that we're portrayed, but then the way we're portrayed influences the way our partners receive us, the way our partners think. And I think of that. I was talking to a family relative just to prove the point on the way the media is. And this particular family member saying, I'm looking for love. And, is older and is thinking about, oh, I want love. And I said, okay. I asked a simple question. well, what does love look like? And this individual said, well, you know, like you see on TV. And I didn't laugh or I didn't, I was like, I was shocked.
Yeah,
I was like, oh my goodness. It's the power of media.
exactly.
It's the same stress that we put on relationships. The same stress we put on relationships is because the relationships we think, I tell my kids every time we see one of these lovey dovey movies, I'm going in the middle of the movie, right? Like the same time, if I see something inappropriate, I'm telling my kids to close their eyes. If there's like a lovey dovey, I'm like, guys, chances of you dropping your books and looking and gazing into someone's eyes and all of a sudden just feel love and there's no problems. And that's not realistic. Like, when they show couples arguing, right?
Yeah.
It's dysfunctional. That's actually normal behavior in a relationship when you're bringing two bodies together,
Yeah.
but they don't normalize these behavior. We romanticize certain ideas of what we think, and that's what's selling. I think you can make movies of just reality because people can connect to that. I think that's why social media is so funny because you see a lot of people who are connecting to real behaviors. This production type of idea doesn't really do well on social media because the craving and the appetite is for normal behavior. I'm not messed up because I do X, Y, and Z. And so and I know I've kind of gone off on a tangent there, but when it comes to mental health, I can speak to, for me as a man and as a father, that I would love to see more real behavior and a wide variety of fathers rather than fathers. Like, I know my kids' teachers. In fact, I had one right before Christmas break. I sat down one-on-one with my kids' teachers. Like I know who their friends are. I'm not this guy that just sit on the couch and just, babe, cook me a meal. Like, how many times have we seen that? And then what my young daughters and what young women are seeing is like, oh, see, this is the problem with men. And they treat the good guys and the fathers and you know what I mean? And then think about the relationship issues and the problems and the expectations and the stress and the lack of communication. All that stuff kind of contributes to kind of that mental health. Because I've had that personal struggle myself in trying to break out of a stereotype that doesn't fit me. I'm like, I'm not that guy. I'll tell you a quick little story. My wife and I got into an argument. I hope she doesn't get mad at me for saying this, but we got into an argument early in our relationship. And she said, you're acting like a colorful word. And I'm going, why? Because I'm expressing myself. But it taught me then and there that she wasn't accustomed to that because that's not the image of a man. A man doesn't communicate. It's not that a man doesn't want to communicate. Oftentimes what we talked about before, if he communicates, usually the issue gets bigger. And then he's now trying to manage the situation and so on and so forth. So I'm like, no, I need a safe space to be able to express myself as well. But again, the media changes the way, and the same thing is true for men to women, how men view women as well. It's like, we just need more real behavior in the media.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it.
I have a lot to say. I could go for 2 more hours on this.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Believe me. I always try to I try to get the point across to patients and families kind of on an individual level that mental health issues are just as important, just as dangerous, and just as necessary to treat as if you had any other kind of injury. You broke an arm, you broke a leg, you go to the doctor, you get an x-ray, a diagnosis, you treat it. No one thinks twice about it. I have major depression. It's, well, have you tried not being so sad? Or, just pick yourself up by the bootstraps. We say all these useless kind of phrases that don't really actually help anything. So your perspective is
and also identifying the wide range of mental health, because I think when people think mental health, they think of, major depression.
Yeah.
Like, but before you even get to that, there's a wide range. Just thinking like being a silent night or a stuffer, thinking about the mental health and your mental health and what that does to a person and how that manifests inside of the body. If you're in a toxic relationship where you can't be expressive and all the different thoughts that are going through your mind, and you're just literally, it's like drinking poison, right? And then, and hoping that someone will somehow rescue, but you haven't told them. And then before you know it, your insides are just, and then boom, you're done. right? It's really bad out there. And so, but I think people don't recognize it because they're only looking for the extreme versions of the mental health spectrum. But there's, as you know, right, Doc, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a wide range
Oh, yeah.
when it comes to mental health.
Oh, it's extremely wide range. We talk about depression and anxiety all the time because those are the most commonly diagnosed ones. But yeah, I mean, there's post-traumatic stress disorder, there's conversion disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. I mean, it goes on and on.
So what comes to my mind is somebody coming home from war.
Yeah, and that's where I spent a lot of time treating those guys coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Yep.
Yeah. And it'd be interesting to know what that looks like, because most people are like, oh, I couldn't have post-traumatic, but I think about the neighborhood I grew up in. I grew up in the inner city, and I've seen a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And but most people wouldn't consider that, post-traumatic syndrome. You know what I mean?
I drew a direct parallel in my mind to the experience of working with soldiers, as they, in a way, deal with the similar concept that you were describing. Imagine you're in Iraq, you're driving around a $10 million Abrams tank, and then you come home and you're just supposed to work in a gas station. Try that changeover, or change in self-identity. You're responsible for millions of dollars of equipment. You come back and you can't get a job, or you're working in a carpet store selling carpet. I've had guys tell me that exactly, and they struggle with that transition significantly coming back, whether they have PTSD or not.
Yeah.
We just have a few minutes left, but I did want to ask you about any charities that you're currently supporting, or how our viewers can learn more about things that you're involved with, specific websites, or anything else you wanted to chat about.
Yeah, I'm working with two foundations. One is the aforementioned Michael J. Fox Foundation, which is very near and dear to my heart as a board member as well. We're looking to find a cure to cure Parkinson's once and for all. Of course, Michael J. Fox, that has been his number one mission. His number one mission is to find a cure and then close down shop. It's not to have this foundation up and running forever.
Yeah.
It's hey, let's find a cure. Let's do something together, come together and find a cure and have an end goal, which I think is so powerful. And then the other one is the Asamoah Foundation, that is looking to bridge the gap, both educational with education from inner city to sub-Saharan Africa, and being able to get resources to expose kids to different colleges and different trades. And so those two foundations I work close together with. The other thing is just, my book that I wrote just a couple of years ago, Everyone Can Be a Ninja, talking about the underdog path to success. You can find it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever books are sold. But it does really tell the story, just like the show American Ninja Warrior, going through obstacles. This book kind of takes you through how to navigate through life's obstacles as well. I share my story, other friends of mine like Allison Felix and former teammates of mine as well, and ninjas on the show, and put together a collection of 10 chapters of how to navigate through the obstacles of life. And it's the underdog path to success.
Excellent. Yeah, make sure to check out his book, check out the show American Ninja Warrior, as well as the talk. One last question for you. Do you ever run the course when the cameras aren't on? Just curious.
Yes, I've run the course one time in 2018, and that was when the camera was on. So you got to check it out on YouTube.
I will. I think a lot of viewers at home think they can do it. I'm one of them. Like, I could do that. I'd probably fall flat on my butt in the first 10 seconds. So
it took me 3 months of training, but I was able to do it.
All right, cool.